believes, for example, that the characteristics of the soil should always be considered first, its texture and chemical composition. The climate is the next most relevant factor, and thirdly, the grape variety chosen, which should be specific to the soil and climate. The techniques of the vinification, that is the actual winemaking process, should vary according to the soil, climate and grape. Transportation is the next consideration, and finally the consumer's palate. In other words, the traditional wine grower believes the consumer should be considered last, but will end up with the best and most specific wine. According to the Suze Wine University, some vignerons in California and Australia have got it all wrong and have put the consumer's taste first and the soil and climatic characteristics last. What suffers then is the wine. It's understandable, therefore, that the university's soils analysis is precise and objective. Here, various soils are placed in solution and mixed thoroughly before analysis in a gas chromatograph. This allows an accurate tracing of all the elements in the soil, essential in understanding which grapes to plant, how to irrigate, and the likely acidity of the wines that result. Most wineries have an enological laboratory where the acidity, sugar, alcohol and tannin levels are all measured. But here at Suze, all of the minerals and elements within the wine are assessed. Potassium, copper, iron, sulfur dioxide. Too much potassium, for example, which is caused by incorrect irrigation methods, gives the wine a cloudiness, and too much copper or iron also causes a strange colour in the wine and makes it taste quite metallic. But if this information is available to the vigneron, then subtle changes can be made in his irrigation or fertilisation procedures to improve the wine. And eventually, all of this information about the relationship between the soil, the wine, the climate will go onto a central database prepared by the Suze University and will be available to vignerons internationally to improve the product. The Buisson area has already become part of a pilot mapping study by the university, where statistics on soil, terrain, climate, grapes, and the wine quality and yield have been compiled on computer to generate in 2- and 3-dimensional maps a totally objective assessment of a particular patch of soil for a particular wine type. The French always look for specificity and find that extra quality in wine where the grape and the soil complement each other perfectly. Here in the heart of the old chateau is the chapel, which has been converted into Europe's most sophisticated wine tasting laboratories. In this room, the conditions are perfectly regulated: light, temperature and humidity. On the floors, cork tiles have been laid to cut down noise, and the air of the room is completely recirculated every 7 minutes so that no wine odours remain. It's all to provide the most objective environment for the taster to assess the wine. The tasting classes for professionals involved in either the wine industry, the restaurant or hotel trade is one of the university's more popular activities. But the real test of the tasting rooms is with appellation contrôlée, the internationally acknowledged system of recognizing an intrinsic character of certain quality wines and stipulating the conditions in which they're produced. The system is designed to maintain a quality in the French wine industry and to stop fraudulent representation of particular wines. 50 years old, Appellation d'Origine has already defined 400 wines and 50 wine-based spirits, and it's defended their reputation. The Wine University hosts professional tasters and must accept responsibility for their classification of certain wine types. In a Europe which is drowning in wine lakes, Appellation contrôlée has become an essential standard. Well, I guess every job has to have its perks, and the chances of being able to try a rare 1964 champagne, which is still very lively and full of character, is one such privilege. But if the university's database and the laboratory work being carried out here means that more wines of this quality are going to be produced, especially closer to home, then vive l'université. And to you, bon chance and good drinking.
Everyone knows this sort of activity, if you do it regularly, is very good for your general condition. But orthopedic surgeons will tell you that it's murder on your knees. The constant pounding of jogging and running produce enormous impacts and stresses on joints, particularly the knees, often tearing tendons and ligaments, which, if badly damaged, have been virtually impossible to repair. But on the east coast of the United States, here in New Jersey at the University of Medicine and Dentistry's medical school, researchers are using radically new techniques to repair and replace what had previously been thought to be permanently damaged ligaments. Knee operations are not the prettiest of sights, but the technology being perfected here is returning the use of their knees to people who would otherwise be permanently crippled. Well, at the moment, Dr. Andrew Weiss is in the midst of a 2-hour operation on the knee of a young man who injured both the posterior and the anterior cruciate ligaments. Those are the two that cross over in the middle of the knee in a car accident in 1983. He's had several previous attempts to correct the injuries with surgery, and all of them have been unsuccessful. Now, they're simply going to replace the ligaments with new ones made of carbon fiber. Ligaments, which connect bone to bone, and tendons, which connect muscle to bone, are composed of collagen. If damaged, they rarely grow back again. Grafts from cadavers are usually rejected, while synthetic replacements up till now have either fallen apart or caused abnormal growth in the surrounding tissues. But carbon fiber is proving to be quite different. Well, the original work with carbon fibers was done by Dr. David Jenkins of Cardiff in Wales with this sort of material. And as you can see, it's fairly difficult sort of stuff to work with. So what the scientists in New Jersey are working with is something quite different. It's this, virtually a complete artificial ligament with cutting needles at both ends. But the important difference is that the 10,000 tiny fibers in the artificial ligament are bonded together with a substance called polylactic acid, which holds them like that until the implant is fully in place. And then it slowly starts to dissolve and allows the fibers to separate and for the body's tissues to have access to the fibers and then for the collagen to begin growing along it. To get a better idea of what's involved with this little model of the knee, you can see the relative position of the ligaments. Inside here in the middle of the knee are the cruciate ligaments. That's the anterior one in the front and the posterior one in the back, and they cross over, as I said, in between. And on the outside you've got two other ligaments. One here is the lateral collateral, and this one here is the medial collateral on that side. The ones in the middle of the knee are very important, and they're also more difficult to operate on. And here you can see how a collateral ligament is replaced. A relatively simple sewing procedure of passing it through the torn ends and then weaving it through the tissue behind each end to secure it firmly. And once the wound is stitched up, the collagen gradually begins to grow along the fibers. These electron microscope pictures, magnifying thousands of times, show the growth of cell tissue that begins almost immediately over the carbon filaments. These are minute biopsies, tiny sections that have been cut out of the healing tissue. So some ends of the fibers have been cut, but you can see how the tissue grows over and around them until they are completely surrounded, like these fibers in a medial collateral ligament several months after implantation. Eventually, the carbon fibers dissolve away completely, leaving only the new ligament material in place. At the moment, the implant procedure is regarded as experimental, but US health authorities will shortly give approval for much wider use of the technique by other orthopedic surgeons.
I think it is gaining. I think it will gain much more over the next few years, especially when this particular material is allowed to be used by the average orthopedic surgeon in the United States for certain indications. And I think that will probably happen within the next year. Then people will try it and they will see for themselves how helpful it is. It's very hard to objectively evaluate another surgeon's work and say, how will it work in my hands?
But you're happy.
Yes, yes, I am happy. I think I'm not euphoric. I'm happy. I think it has helped many patients. I think it's another material to be used in reconstruction of soft tissues, and I think it's the first step along a long path from this point on using aerospace materials technology in medicine.
And although, fortunately, the majority of joggers and runners won't have to go through the sort of operation we've been talking about, it's somehow comforting to know that the technology is there to do it.
The 1979 Fastnet race in the shallow waters off the English coast. It was the worst disaster in the 100-year history of ocean yacht racing, with 15 people drowned. 9 of those died of hypothermia, resulting in an inquiry into the standards of life-saving equipment, including lifeboats, many of which had capsized or disintegrated in the rough seas. Out of that disaster has come this, an inflatable rubber dinghy or lifeboat, here being tested in a scaled-down version in the wind and wave tank of the National Maritime Institute at Teddington in England. Called the Tinker Tramp and designed by Fred Benyon Tinker, the craft with a survival canopy was tested at wind speeds of over 70 knots. Even in those conditions, that is, faster than the average wind speed in a hurricane, the test model was found to be buoyant and stable. To trial it at sea, I abandoned ship in waters just off Sydney as the rain pelted down. We're not experiencing any of those conditions today, but we can demonstrate 2 of the features of the craft: its apparent unsinkability and the ease with which a yachty can scramble on board in rough seas. The craft is rapidly inflated with 2 carbon dioxide cylinders. The 2 tubes inflate in less than 10 seconds and give the craft a twin-hulled shape, more like a catamaran than a dinghy. It took a bit of effort to hoist the Tinker overboard, but that may not be a problem in a rapidly sinking yacht. Once on board, I scrambled under the deflated canopy in search of the drogue anchor, the most vital item on board. Rule number 1 is really don't panic. And once you're actually in the life raft, the most important thing then is to get the anchor thrown out, which will give the raft added stability. And with this hand pump, is here to begin pumping up the canopy. When inflated, the canopy adds another 300 kilograms of buoyancy to the life raft. So if you take it steady in times of emergency and go through all the procedures accurately, you increase your chances of being able to be found alive. I then tried to capsize the dinghy to test its buoyancy. To capsize it, I had to stand up inside, leaning against the canopy with my feet on one hull. It went over, and to my surprise, took in no water at all. I then righted it by a gentle rocking motion. The Tinker truly did seem to be unsinkable. And it was great to get back into the warm after all of that. The Tinker Inflatable, as you can see, is an extremely versatile craft, because even at sea it's possible to remove the canopy and rig it into this configuration in less than 25 minutes. For the lone survivor at sea, far better to be on a lifeboat which will not only ride out severe storms, but provide the means of sailing towards the best chance of rescue when conditions allow. The Inflatables kit includes a number of other survival aids, including this Australian manufactured hypothermia blanket. Its multiple layers of synthetic fibre render it completely waterproof, even when soaked in water. It just needs a squeeze and a bit of a shake, and the inside of the blanket is already quite dry and so provides a lot of warmth. The sea anchor is a design feat because it allows this inflatable to break all of the conventional rules of life rafts, holding the vessel's beam onto the sea instead of its bow. This means that waves break against the side of the inflatable so that it takes in very little water. And of course, the boat's rigid bottom with the centreboard casing and the floor bonded into the Hypalon fibre. Ordinary inflatables lack rigidity. They capsize easily and make it very difficult to pull anyone out of the water into the craft. The Tinker also has this feature, a scoop bow, making it easy to slide on board if you're wearing heavy wet clothes and the seas are raging around you. The rigidity also gives the boat, as I found, a fantastic performance under sail, a great bonus to this inflatable, considered by the British National Maritime Institute as being capable of surviving 70-knot winds. It's manufactured in New Zealand and fully rigged sells for around $3,500. It'll fit into the boot of most cars and the hold of large yachts. But personally, I'd rather go sailing in this.
Well, that's okay for sailors, but what about for aviators? Pilots of the Royal Australian Air Force who fly Mirage jets, for example, carry their life rafts with them. The self-inflating dinghy is part of the Martin Baker ejection seat assembly, and it's packed in a fiberglass container back here. It doubles as their seat in the aircraft, and when they're fired from the stricken jet at around 12 Gs, the life raft brings up the rear. If the pilot was to land over rocky or timbered terrain, the pilot keeps the pack on to protect the posterior. But if they are going to ditch at sea, the idea is to drop the assembly below them as they parachute down, and the pack is attached to a tether line which is underneath all this paraphernalia, and that drops away and self-inflates when it reaches the end of its travel. So far, so good. Well, this is the stuff that TV bloopers are made of, but here goes. There they go. It worked. Well, it looks pretty tiny from up here, but I guess 200 kilometres out in the Pacific, it'd be the sweetest sight any pilot saw. Oh, well, it's nice to be back at ground level, I can assure you. Well, the life raft is here fully inflated, but it could be 4 metres away. Fortunately, it's at the end of this tether, so I'll be able to pull it to me. But before I drown under the weight of all this gear, the helmet and the parachute, I'll get them off. Oh. The parachute harness just undoes here, I understand. Bit of a low blow. Now, part of the standard equipment that the pilot has is also gives him a set of personal water wings, and by pulling these tags here, compressed air inflates them to give them enough buoyancy to keep afloat while I'm still wearing all this gear. So we'll give it a go. Well, that's pretty. Well, underneath here is shark repellent, a whistle, and a combination two-way radio and emergency distress beacon. There's also some spare batteries to charge the distress beacon. Now we'll have a look at the raft. First I might take off my water wings as well, because I have a distinct feeling they look a little silly. But there's no doubt that they've got enough buoyancy to keep you afloat. And when you first have a look at the interior of the raft, there's a drogue parachute that the pilot throws overboard to prevent undue drifting in the sea's currents. And inside there's a little bailer and a viscous sponge to mop up any water that gets inside. And the idea is to get inside the raft and then pull this section up over your head and then inflate it orally through there. And as for the catering corps' contribution to the whole exercise, inside there's a mosquito net, 6 packs of 250 mils of water, and these strange little things that are actually leak stoppers. If there's a leak in the craft, you bore them into the side. There's some light reading, staying alive. Some warm socks, obviously that'd be pretty important. And here's something that'd be important, the seasickness pills. There's also a ration pack down here, and that would, among other things, enable you to have a cold beef broth. And I also understand there's some sunglasses in there to take the glare off for your impromptu ocean cruise. But generally it's amazingly compact. It's amazing that the Air Force can get all of that into such a small bundle.
This little village is called Bangjumori in the heartlands of the Korean Peninsula. Around here, people survive on less than $100 a month. Their major industries are agricultural, ginseng growing, potato farming, and rice growing. But within the next decade, their lifestyles will change dramatically, because just a few kilometres down the road, a new industry is being born. Just on the other side of a mountain range is Korea's Silicon Valley. The speed at which Korea has leapt into space-age technology has staggered the world's high-tech nations. Recognizing that semiconductors are the crude oil of electronics, Korea is developing an export-oriented chip manufacturing industry. It claims to have been third in the world behind America and Japan to produce the 64,000-bit chip, an achievement nothing short of miraculous for a developing nation. One of Korea's 4 major conglomerates, Samsung Industries, has led the semiconductor boom. Its staple chip diet is based on this, a small slither of silicon bonded to a ceramic base, which sells at about $2 a piece. So what's the fuss all about? Well, these are transistors, 150,000 of them. And just a few short years ago, all of these would have been required to provide the switching mechanism for a personal computer with a memory capacity of 64,000 bits of information. 150,000 transistors mounted on a frame. You can imagine the size of that personal computer. Just 2 years ago, Korea's technology was at transistor level. Today, Korea is producing this, the 64K dynamic random access memory chip, a general purpose chip required for an electronics industry based on video cassette recorders, personal computers, and color televisions. With this tiny device, Korea can take on the electronics giants of the United States and its arch-rival, Japan. Samsung has claimed that its development of the 64,000-bit chip occurred independently, except for the mask design technology provided by Micron of the United States. On these computers, the blueprints for chip designs, the masks, are drawn. Young PhD graduates have been enticed back to Korea from the United States to build up this important design ability within the industry. Samsung claimed the mask design for a 250,000-bit chip has now been developed in Korea. A high level of secrecy surrounds the actual chip fabrication process. As the first foreign television crew permitted to tape the Samsung operation, we were allowed to observe, though at a distance, the magnificent clean room. Here, the wafers of silicon carrying chips with 130,000 circuitries in a line width of 3 microns, that's 1.5 times as wide as a human hair, are examined under microscope. The process isn't fully automated, but Korea has an inexpensive workforce requiring experience in this industry. From that fabrication line, the chips come here for final testing. Using visual and computer examination, the chips are screened 4 times for any flaws in the circuitry or in the dyes coating the chips. At present, Samsung is claiming a yield of a very respectable 60%, which it hopes to increase to 70% later this year. By that time, this factory will be producing 6 million 64K DRAM chips every month. If the Korean chips are accepted in the international marketplace, they'll eventually find their way into domestic appliances, personal computers and VTRs around the world. And while America and Japan look to the higher profit margin products, Korea seems content to opt for products with a low profit. The domestic Korean computer market is booming. As the workforce's standard of living increases, so too does the demand for products requiring microchip technology. Not one of these computers is imported. The apparent similarity in name with that well-known Californian computer is, the Koreans might say, coincidental. The extraordinary ability of the Koreans to copy is reminiscent of the Japanese not so long ago. And so too is the ease with which Korea has integrated this newfound industry with more traditional values. A Shinto religious ceremony attended by earnest-looking young Korean professionals at Samsung. The occasion, not a religious feast, not a public holiday, but the arrival at Samsung of a new computer likely to expedite the company's next stage of chip manufacture, the VLSI, a complex, custom-designed chip at the very leading edge of today's technology.
And Beyond 2000 will be back next Monday at 2:30 here on Grampian.